Thank you very much, Stephen. It's great to see you again here every year, as well as Deirdre's family. It's really wonderful. I was sort of thinking about how we've all changed over the years. We've all grown a little bit older and a little bit wiser, I'm sure, as well. It's also wonderful to see not only so many students here on a snowy afternoon, but also members of the community. And I think, Bruce, you'd be delighted to know that this audience, just looking around, contains not only some of the key people who have written Canada's privacy legislation, conceived of it, implemented it, others who've sort of been continuing to put it into action, but a number of people from other government sectors, from the insurance industry and other lawyers from town as well. So we're glad to have everybody here. And I am super excited to introduce Bruce Schneier to everybody. I have known Bruce Schneier. I think we first met when you were writing Beyond Fear, which was a 2003 book of Bruce's. The subtitle, which I think is very important, is Thinking Sensibly About Security in an Uncertain World. And I remember when reading that book and thinking about Bruce's writing, one of the most important things that I took away from that book is really understanding the sense in which privacy is about trade-offs of certain sorts. And you talked a lot in that book about the way that we make sensible trade-offs when thinking about privacy. And this was something that struck me, and something to which I had a fair bit of resistance at first, because as somebody who sort of comes as an academic, one tends sometimes to be more inclined towards idealistic positions. But what I came to see in Bruce's writing over the years is that he not only has this incredibly sensible, pragmatic approach, but he's somebody who sort of can see how it fits critically with security. In other words, that privacy is an essential feature of a secure system. So over the years, he's written many books, too many to talk about. His most recent one, which he just gave a few copies to me and my colleagues, which we're very grateful of, Data and Goliath. Before that, a book called Carry On, Liars and Outliers, which I believe there's some materials about if people want to pick it up, Secrets and Lies, and a number of others. But I think it's fair to say that you started sort of more squarely in the cryptography space and wrote about applied cryptography. But my favorite of the titles of Bruce's books is, I think, an older one in the cryptography literature called the two-fish encryption algorithm. Now, despite being incredibly prolific in terms of writing books, I think it's fair to say that many people, when they think of Bruce Schneier, they think about one of his more valuable contributions as being his regular blog, as well as his newsletter, Cryptogram. These are the kind of things that do not escape law professors, and are the kind of things that we assign as part of our required reading, and I'm really grateful for all of the contributions that you've made in that respect. Bruce and I are both members, as well as other people in the room, I see Stephanie Perrin here as well, of the advisory board for the Electronic Privacy Information Center. And what I can tell you is, in my work with Bruce there, he is truly an amazing advisory board member. His intuitions about issues as they come up and how to deal with them and handle them are spot on all the time. But he's one of those people who, in my view at least, provides the kinds of foresights that are only seen later by others as hindsight. And I think that's a really amazing skill. But I think most important of all, he is a true mensch, a friendly guy, a funny guy, a lovely guy. And I'm really delighted that you're all going to get to hear him talk in person here in Canada at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law, Centre of Law, Technology and Society. So Bruce, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for the snow. All right, so here's the deal. In 2 weeks, the RSA Conference is the big security conference in my industry. I'm speaking there. They make it very clear that they want me to have a new talk and not something I've done before. But if I do that, it'll be raw and not very good. So I like to preview them. So I'm going to give you the talk I'm going to give there, but I don't want you to tell anybody. And if we can do that, I think we're good. All right, so the title of the talk was Security and Privacy in the World-Sized Web, which is deliberately opaque. because I'm always asked to produce titles before I actually know what I'm talking about. So let me sort of progress where I think we are today and where we're going and why I chose that title. So today we've built this huge array of socio-technical systems. And I think that's a real important phrase that we learn to start using. Socio-technical systems are complex, interconnected, social and technical systems. Think Facebook. There's a technical part, there's a social part, they work together. Socio-technical systems have lots of moving parts, lots of parties, lots of interests. And these things aren't just different in scale, they're different in kind. So you'll think of chip and pin authentication systems, or online reputation systems like eBay's feedback system, or modern predictive policing systems, electronic voting systems, or Bitcoin. I mean, these are all socio-technical systems. And there are a lot of things about them that make them different in important ways. The first one, the obvious one, is scale in all sorts of dimensions. Right? More people, increased complexity, increased speed, increased frequency, right? Decreased distance, decreased cost. Right? A lot of dramatically increased capabilities in ways that people don't understand. Right? Our intuition about cameras and privacy have to do with distance. And long-range cameras have changed that. We look outside, see no cameras, we think we're okay. But both miniaturization and resolution have changed that. Right? The capabilities have increased more than what we know about them. Ubiquitous surveillance works the same way. Data aggregation, data analysis, systems that never forget. Right? These are all changes in capabilities. Differences in time. If you remember the Volkswagen case from a few months ago, there's a group of programmers making a change in software that's affecting regulation tests 6 years later. Right? Increased complexity, very important. A lot of these systems don't work in ways we understand, and I'll talk more about that later. Automation replacing judgment. In a lot of these systems, the technical part replaces an older human part. So you'll have automatic systems for giving loans that replace human judgment. Interactions between systems, and a brittleness of socio-technical systems you don't find the same way in social systems, right? In natural systems, in human systems. And some of these socio-technical systems are a very large scale. Right? 2 billion people have email addresses. 1 billion people have Facebook accounts. Right? Credit cards in the multiple billions, many with chip and pin. I mean, last time I checked, the number's probably wrong now, 6.5 billion US in Bitcoin. Right? These are huge systems. And these socio-technical systems are moving everywhere because everything is now a computer. And this is important. Right? Your car used to be a mechanical device with some computers in it. Now it is a 20 to 40 computer distributed system with 4 wheels and an engine. And that is a very important change that's happening everywhere in our lives. Right? There are the personal networks, the wearable devices, the medical devices, the things on us that are increasingly capable and increasingly talking. There are the smart homes. Right? I have a smart thermostat. Some of us have smart refrigerators. You can buy smart light bulbs. Right? These are all going to proliferate. Smart organizations. Right? This law school will get things that will be smart in different ways. Right? Smart cities. You read talks about smart energy grids, smart transportation networks, smart human services, which flows into digital government. So at all levels, these socio-technical systems are proliferating. And when these systems become as interconnected as they have, they no longer make up a web that you connect to. Right? They become this entirely new world that we live in, no matter where we are or where we go. So I argue we've reached a phase change, fundamental shift due to scale and scope, that these differences in degree are causing a difference in kind. That we're really seeing this ultimate integration of socio-technical systems into our lives. Right? That computing becomes a substrate under everything. And this results in a lot of new things. Right? So for example, a lot of new power structures and power balances. I mean, later I'll talk about centralized versus decentralized systems. And these systems are filled with emergent properties. Right? Things that they do that we don't understand or we can't predict. And this is natural for us. I mean, we're pretty good at predicting technological change, but we are terrible at predicting social change due to technical change. So you go back to the invention of the automobile. Everyone predicted people will go faster and further. No one predicted the rise of the modern suburb. Or even as early as the 1990s, read all the stuff we wrote about the information superhighway. And it's kind of amazing how profoundly wrong we got it, even though we kind of got the tech right. So this is more than the internet. It's the Internet of Things. Right? It's the computerization of everything. And when I think about the Internet of Things, I think about it having 3 or 4 parts. So there are the sensors that collect data about our environment. Right? So smartphone location data, smart thermostat and light bulb, people in the house data, Internet-enabled street sensors, highway sensors. Right? So there's the data collection. There's the smarts in the center that figure out what the data means and what to do based on it. Right? And this includes the processing and the memory. That's where I get my 3 or 4. I don't know if that's 1 part or 2 parts. Mostly in the cloud. It does the thinking. And then there's the actuators that affect our environment. I mean, the whole point of the smart thermostat is to figure out what's going on and to change the temperature based on it. Right? So a driverless car will figure out what's going on the roads, both in the immediate vicinity and traffic around town, and then make driving decisions based on it. So you can think of the sensors as the eyes and ears of the internet. You can think of the actuators as the hands and feet of the internet, and the stuff in the middle as the brain. So the internet now senses, thinks, and acts, which is basically the definition of a robot. So I argue that we are building a world-sized robot and we don't even realize it. And that is what I'm calling the world-sized web. Now, writ large, this is more than the Internet of Things. It's a combination of several computing trends, of mobile, right, computing that follows you, of cloud computing and cloud storage, right, the huge databases of personal information, this Internet of Things, or really more generally, cyber-physical systems, right, systems that affect the world, persistent computing, and autonomy, which in the past 6 months has been talked about as artificial intelligence. Right? It's smart things that act on the world in a direct physical manner. Right? Again, an internet that thinks, that senses, thinks, and acts. And I see this as a transformative technology that will cause all sorts of social changes. Right? This world-sized web robot is getting more powerful through all the interconnections we're building. Right? I'm a security guy. I look at this and say, whoa, we need to secure it. Right? Because now everything will become one interconnected system of systems. interconnected threats, interconnected attackers, interconnected effects. And so this turns about securing this massive world that we don't know much about, that knows everything about us, right? That's sort of incredibly observant and increasingly intelligent and increasingly capable. It's all the risks we know just dialed up to 11, including new risks from non-human actors, right? From algorithms, from agents, and from like actual robots. Right? And it's security problems that we can no longer solve by turning our computers off or leaving our phones at home. And let's face it, we are super vulnerable here. Now, in general, there are two basic paradigms of security, and we need to think about both. There's it's called paradigm A, which is secure the thing properly the first time. And this comes from the real world, the world of planes and automobiles and medical devices and pharmaceuticals. Right? Don't unleash it into the world until you have it right. Then there's paradigm B, which is make sure your security is agile, which comes from the computer world, right? The fast-moving and heretofore largely benign world of software. Rapid prototyping, rapid update. Right? Your iPhone apps can update, every day. A lot of them update once a week. Your car updates, what, every 10 years? Your thermostat, every never. Real different. Here, more about survivability, recoverability, mitigation, adaptability, muddling through. Right? That's what this is. This is get it right the first time. These two worlds are colliding. They're colliding in your car, in medical devices, in voting machines. They're colliding again and again. And the stakes are getting higher in a bunch of dimensions. When I think of the security of these complex sociotechnical systems, this world-sized web, it becomes a war of all against all. Users, hackers, criminals, corporations, governments, everyone is attacking everybody else. Right? Hackers attack corporations all the time. Corporations attack users. Users attack other users, fake Yelp reviews, right? Corporations attack other corporations. Uber fights taxis. Amazon fights book publishers. Apple fights the music industry. Governments attack other governments all the time. Governments attack themselves. In the United States, the CIA spied on the Senate. Corporations attacking government regulators. Remember Volkswagen? And on and on and on and on. Right? Not that all threats are created equal or that all security problems are equally important, but as we build this thing, different interests will have different security interests, and you can't focus on one threat or just one attacker. And this isn't just privacy. And these are threats in many forms. Right? Systemic biases in design, data manipulation, data destruction, cheating and fraud, surveillance issues, data denial, censorship, use restrictions, use control. Right? The threats get very complicated because the things become capable. And so let's get back to modern cars as an example. We actually don't want anybody to use the navigation systems to conduct broad surveillance, right? Or to turn on the microphone to eavesdrop. But maybe we want the police to. We definitely don't want people to hack their own cars to bypass emission control laws. And we actually don't want the manufacturers to do that either. We might want the police to be able to safely and remotely disable a car. We don't want hackers to be able to do that. We probably want a button in the car that says, stop safely and let me get out. We do want the system to make overall choices to improve traffic efficiency and safety. But we don't want the system to be able to use for social control. And on and on and on and on. And when you look at these threats, these use cases, you quickly notice that the integrity and availability threats are much worse than the confidentiality threats. I mean, it would be bad if someone can use these nav systems to spy on everybody. It would be worse if they can use them to get all the cars to crash into each other. And then less worse, but still bad, if they can use them to disable all the cars in the city. Now, the effects are greater. There's real risks to life and property. I mean, algorithms can have lasting effects. You think of predictive policing. Think of algorithms figuring out who gets loans or gets into college, who gets government services. Right, back to the car example, we actually want driverless cars. Right, they have the potential to eliminate tens of thousands of deaths worldwide, possibly in the hundreds of thousands per year. But this comes at the cost of privacy and tracking issues, and the risk of malicious hacking and denial of service and everything else. How do we build systems that allow us to hand over control of our transportation to automated agents without sacrificing freedoms and safety? This is hard. Right? In this world-sized web, rights start bumping against each other all the time. Right? Your right to fly a drone versus my right to privacy. My right to security versus your law enforcement needs. Your right to tinker with the security risks of too much tinkering. Or the fundamental issue of our data individually versus our data collectively. Right? That whole problem of what our data can do for good versus the potential harm. And so it's that same thing, privacy versus our ability to reduce auto accidents. Or the value of putting all of our medical data in one huge database and letting researchers at it with the enormous privacy implications. Or Waze. I mean, this morning I came here from Boston, and my cab driver used Waze to get me from my apartment to the airport. And Waze is a great system. It gives me real-time traffic information that allows me to avoid traffic jams, and only works because everyone who uses Waze is under constant surveillance by the system. Right? Enormous collective benefit, yet individual risk. So I've said for, a couple of decades that security is an arms race. I mean, the way to think of security in a technological environment is an arms race. And what technology does is it perturbs the balance between attacker and defender. And you can see that in a lot of areas. Different technologies change, and then each side reacts. Right? So think of Google versus click fraud. It's a never-ending arms race. Or ad blockers versus ad blockers. Right? Just yesterday I learned that Wired now blocks me because I have an ad blocker. How soon before the ad blocker recognizes this and blocks Wired's blocking of the ad blocker? Right? This will go on and on. Right? Credit card fraud. I mean, it's the same thing. Or spam versus the spam checkers. You see this in digital rights management, in government surveillance. So you see this arms race. Now, there are three modern trends that I want to highlight that affect this arms race, specifically in the context of the world-sized web and security. First one is that internet socio-technical systems shift power balances, all sorts of power balances, between governments and people, between different industries, between nation-states and non-nation-state actors. Now, in general, the unorganized are the first to benefit from new technologies. A new technology appears, and the unorganized are able to use it first. It gives them access to coordination, organization, dissemination, action in ways they didn't have before. And this can be incredibly empowering. You can look at the SOPA-PIPA debates in the United States between 2011 and 2012, or the Gezi protests in Turkey, or the rise of crowdfunding as a mechanism for getting things done. Right? These new technologies can invert power dynamics, even in the face of surveillance and censorship. And we see that a lot on the internet. But that is just half the story. Because you have traditional power using these technologies as well. And while technology magnifies power in general, the rates of adoption are different. Right? Criminals, dissidents, the unorganized of any kind, the outliers, are more agile. They can make use of new technologies faster. But when the already powerful big institutions finally figure out how to harness the technology, they have more raw power to magnify. And by this I mean both corporations and governments. There are lots of examples, including winner-take-all systems, like crowdfunding today, where the powerful just get more powerful, the popular just get more popular. So basically, the non-powerful are more efficient at leveraging technology. The powerful have more raw power to leverage. So this is very much a battle between the quick and the strong. Right? The quick, who make use of new technology faster, the strong, who make use of new technology better. Our current technical infrastructure favors traditional power. Right? It favors capabilities reduced through design decisions. Right? Things you can do on Facebook depend on what Facebook wants. Right? Bulk surveillance is kind of built into our current internet architecture. It's something like drone warfare, where a small military cadre can keep an entire country under perpetual bombardment with no risk to themselves, is something new, something facilitated by the way the infrastructure works. Right? Basically, everyone wants access and control, both governments and corporations, because surveillance equals power. That's the first trend. The second trend is that attack has an advantage over defense. This is kind of the ending of my book, Liars and Outliers. That in this arms race, attack has an advantage over defense for a couple of reasons. There's a basic first mover advantage. Defense, as defenders, we tend to respond. Attackers tend to move first. There's an inherent difficulty of securing complex systems. The attacker has to find one way in. The defender needs to secure every possible way in. There is the natural agility of some attackers. Attackers that are not burdened by bureaucracy or procurement laws or any laws or morality have an easier job. So because of this delay, because of this advantage, there's a delay. There's a delay between a new attack and an adequate defense. There's a security gap. And this gap, I'll spare you the details, is greater when there's more technology and is greater in times of rapid technological and social change. And today, right, we're living in a world with more technology than ever before and a more rapid technological change than ever before. And that means right now and going forward, this security gap is going to get wider and wider. Right? Our vulnerabilities will be around for longer, simply because by the time we fix them, the attackers have already moved on to the next attack. That's my second trend. My third trend is about catastrophic risks that are becoming increasingly real. A world where lone attackers can do devastating damage is coming, probably in our lifetimes. Right? In general, technology allows attacks to scale. Right? Think of cybercrime, think of digital piracy. And all of these attacks are much greater because they can be automated, because technology can aid them. Right? 3D printers, remote espionage. Right? Fewer attackers can do more damage due to better technology. And there's a basic numbers game here. I mean, let's take an easy example. Just take, I don't know, burglary, property crime. Sort of broadly, there's some natural crime rate out in this city due to the population. You know, what's going on socially, the level of tech. And there's a crime rate that society is willing to tolerate. And when those two get out of whack, we either spend more money on crime or spend less money on crime, right? You know, we try to maintain that, we try to match the natural crime rate to our acceptance. But as technology makes each individual criminal more powerful, the number of them we can accept are zero. So I'm going to make some numbers up. If there are 10 burglars in Ottawa and they rob a house a week, maybe that's good enough. Right? We're willing to live with 500 burglaries per year in our city. But if suddenly some technology makes each burglar 10 times as efficient, then to maintain that crime rate, we can only have one of them. We have to increase our security because we have to decrease the number of bad actors. And technology can rapidly change the efficiency of a criminal, so you see quick calls for more security. Right? And technology spreads capability. Right? What are today's top secret NSA programs become tomorrow's PhD theses and the next day's hacker tools. All this flows downhill. And this trend is actually more dangerous as the risk is more catastrophic. Right? As you have the capability, and you see it talked about, of terrorists with weapons of mass destruction. That's what this math is about. Go back 20 years, and a terrorist can only do so much damage before he's apprehended. Go forward 20 years, he'll be able to do a lot more. Right? We're not actually concerned about the security of the average. I mean, those burglars are going to follow some bell curve of efficiency. But as you get to catastrophic risks, you're much more concerned about the worst attacker, because he's the one who's going to survive as you chop off all the others. Right? We're worried, at least in theory, about a world where the 5 Sigma guy can ruin it for everybody. And there's a lot of political rhetoric here. Right? The more destabilizing the technologies, the greater the rhetoric of fear. In the United States in the past year, we've seen an incredible amount of fear generated by the Director of National Intelligence, by the head of the NSA, surrounding integrity and availability attacks. And this will mean, it already means, more demands for the government to do something. And I think more government involvement in cyberspace is inevitable. Right? We are seeing more cyber war and more cyber terrorism rhetoric. We are seeing more calls for repressive surveillance and use control. Right? More government on the attack side of security and not on the defensive side of security. Right? Today's Apple story, perfect example of that. All right, so how do we secure this world-sized web? Well, this is not easy. Right? All the aspects of this have their own security challenges. Mobile security is its own thing. Cloud security is its own thing. Internet of Things has its own security. Persistent devices, autonomy. I mean, honestly, I could probably do an hour-long seminar on each of them, and no one would have dinner tonight. Right? Writ large, we need more resilient security. We need more security that can withstand attacks. Defense in depth, compartmentalization, redundancy. I mean, this is actually really hard to do technically, and right now we don't have the requisite engineering to do it well. There will be a lot of muddling through. I mean, one example is class breaks, this notion that if you break one thing, you can break everything. Right? If I can break into your home, it means I just break into your home. If I could break into your computer, I can break into all the computers that look like yours basically while I sleep. There's a lot of tech here, but primarily this is a policy problem. Right? Law, economics, psychology, sociology all matter a lot here. Right? The socio part of a socio-technical system turns out to be the big one. Right? The socio part can mean more than the technology. Lots of examples of good tech where we get the economics and psychology either right or wrong affects us how the system is used. Right? Email security. Right? It's been, 2-3 decades and we still can't secure email? It's not because the tech doesn't work. It's because the psychology of email basically doesn't allow it to be secure. I think we should just give up. You want security, use text messaging. Or anti-spam. Right? The successes and failures depend a lot on the economics. Right? So to make this work, law and technology have to work together. And I think that actually this is the most important lesson of the Edward Snowden documents. That we are living in a world where technology can subvert law and law can subvert technology. That if both don't work, neither works. So I have a practical problem here. There isn't a regulatory structure to tackle this at the general enough level. And here I'm going to drop into United States examples because I know them. There's basically a fundamental mismatch between the way government works and the way computer technology works. Because governments operate in silos. Right? The United States and Congress, committees fight for jurisdictions. The departments and commissions that make up the federal government all have very separate fiefdoms. And it's everything from agriculture to defense to transportation to energy. They're all different. Right? The Federal Trade Commission, which is the United States turning into the agency that is regulating privacy, and they're doing some great stuff, they can only regulate unfair or deceptive trade practices. Right? So there's no authority for harms due to information leakage. There's no authority for privacy violations unless a company makes false promises. If Facebook says in the fine print, we're going to read everything and too bad, the FTC there's nothing they can do. If they say we'll protect your privacy and they don't, then they can do something. Right? And you have these silos. The FAA regulates aircraft, the Department of Transportation regulates cars, the FDA regulates medical devices. And that's not the way the net works. Take big data. In the United States, if big data is used to influence a voter, we have the Federal Election Commission gets involved. If that same data is used to influence a consumer, it's the FTC's jurisdiction. If you use those same technologies in a school, it's the Department of Education. And each agency has their own approach and their own set of rules. And even worse, all the agencies, well, none of the agencies have any expertise on these new issues. This stuff I'm saying is completely opaque to them. And in the United States, nobody's quick to expand an agency's authority, that the silos are very rigid. Right? The internet, the world-sized web, is this freewheeling, integrated system of computers and networks. Right? It's not siloed. It grows horizontally. It destroys barriers all over the place. So people in systems that have never communicated before now can, now interoperate, now are doing new things. And lots of things fall between the cracks. Right? So already on your smartphone, you can have apps that, I don't know, log your health information, control your energy use, and interact with your car. Right? That's right there, 4 different US federal agencies, and my phone hasn't even been booted up yet. Right? We're just getting started. We just don't have the requisite agencies to deal with this. And then robotics is going to bring in a whole new set of problems. Now, in the United States right now, if I were to build a drone that would latch on to the MAC address emanating from your phone and follow you around all day taking pictures, there is no agency that can regulate that. That's the kind of thing that falls between the cracks. Right? Regulatory authority works in silos, but these platforms are general. Right? So whatever solution we have needs to be holistic. Whether they're cars or drones or phones, they are all computers. Everything is a computer. So what I want to propose, I mean, in the US, but you guys should do it too, is a new regulatory agency. Right? That's something to deal with this. University of Washington law professor Rylan Calo has proposed a federal robotics commission. I think it needs to be broader, kind of a Department of Technology policy. And you could argue that maybe that's too broad, that it shouldn't be all technology. But honestly, all technology is computer technology. I mean, that's what it is. And this kind of thing has lots of precedent. Right? You know, new technologies often lead to the formulation of new government regulatory agencies. In the United States, trains did, cars did, airplanes did. We got radio, we had the Federal Radio Commission, became the FCC. Nuclear power led to the formation of whatever that energy commission is, the name escaping me at the moment. Like, I mean, bunch of reasons, right? New technologies need new expertises. And it makes sense to centralize them. And whether it's large personal databases, or algorithmic decision making, or the Internet of Things, or cloud storage and computing, or robotics and autonomous agents, or catastrophic risks, these are all expertises that interrelate with each other in very profound ways. All right, now the devil's in the details here, and I don't have any of them. But the alternative is to do this ad hoc and piecemeal. I mean, these things are coming. And this is just a start. You will notice that I just proposed a federal agency for what I described as a worldwide problem. So that's not going to work. But I do know that markets can't solve this. This is not something that a market will solve for a bunch of reasons, right? We know that markets are short-term and profit motivated at the expense of society. Right? Markets cannot solve collective action problems. And we actually need a strong counterbalancing effect to corporate power. Right? Governments are the entity we use to solve problems like this. And what I'm saying is that governments will get involved no matter what we do. Right? The risks are too great, the stakes are too high. The choice is not between government involvement or no government involvement. You can tell I'm prepping this for a US audience, right? Right? Governments are already involved in physical systems. Right? The choice is between smarter government involvement or dumber government involvement. And we have to start thinking about this. Meanwhile, technically, we need to start disconnecting systems. If we cannot secure complex sociotechnical systems, then we must not build a world where everything is computerized and interconnected. And these systems are not inevitable. There is a technical elite pushing us towards this direction. But honestly, they don't have any good supporting arguments, except it'd be fun. And there are other models of local-only, distributed systems, limits on collection, limits on storage, limits on data. Right? We need more decentralization, more self-empowerment, less centralized control. Now, other things as well, smart failure states, ability to operate offline. And my guess is that soon, I don't know, 5, 10 years, we're going to reach a high watermark of computerization and connectivity. Right? That afterwards we will make much more conscious decisions about what and how we interconnect. And a good analogy might be nuclear power. Right? In the 70s, we were going to have everything with nuclear power. And we reached this high watermark where we sort of looked around and said, you know, this kind of thing, it might be too hard and might be too dangerous. We're not going to do as much as we thought. And then we started doing other things. Right? I think that's coming with data. It's not today. I mean, we're still in the honeymoon phase of connectivity. I mean, very much just like governments and corporations will sort of punch drunk on our data. Right? But I think that's going to change. I mean, I think we actually need to change the fabric of the internet so that evil governments don't have the tools to create horrible totalitarian regimes. And good laws and good regulations in Western democracies will be a great second line of defense, but we actually need a good technological first line of defense. All right, so here are my main points. The world-sized web is going to change everything. More autonomy, more real-world consequences, more catastrophic risks, and fewer off switches. Right now, it's going to be more power to the powerful. This world-sized web is less designed and more created. It largely is coming without any forethought or architecting or planning. And most of us are completely unaware of what we are building here. And even when we try to design, we are regularly surprised by emergent properties. I mean, really the best we can do is observe and channel them as fast as we can. We can hang on for the ride. Right, remember my second trend of the three. Attack is easier than defense. An attacker just has to find one vulnerability, while a defender has to defend against all vulnerabilities. And an attacker with one vulnerability will soon be able to do an incredible amount of damage. Historically, we are very bad at defending against these sorts of threats. Historically, we are very good about panicking about the outlandish scenarios that we can imagine involving these sorts of threats. And also historically, the panic is much more dangerous to freedom and liberty than the actual threats themselves. And this is all coming. The technology is coming. Government involvement is coming. And it is coming faster than most of us think. We need to get ahead of it. We need to start making choices. We need to start building security systems as robust as the threats. We need laws that are technologically invariant, laws that address the economics and psychology property, laws that works. And we need to start making moral and ethical and political decisions about how these systems should work. Until now, we've built a world where programmers have some special right to code the world as they want to see it. I think that needs to end. Right? We need to bring together technologists and policymakers. This is hard to do. And I truly do not believe the existing regulatory structure in pretty much any country in the world is up to this task. And that means we all have to get involved in this debate. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions, comments, improvements. World-sized web is kind of a crappy name and still under discussion, but email me that. Let's not argue. Let's not argue about the name. Let's argue about the topic. You're the first person I saw.
Really good talk. I enjoyed it. I tried to tweet you out to the world there.
Did you try to? Did you say you tweeted me out to the world?
This was the prelude to the RSA Conference.
All right.
So I kept that one under wraps. Two questions for you. For about 15 years now since I've been teaching, I've been saying that we've been living in a critical juncture in which fundamental choices that we make today about technology will lock us into a path for, the next century ahead. But I've been doing that for 15 years, and it's getting to be, that's kind of long to be saying we're in a critical juncture. So I'm wondering, you said the pace of technology is fast, and I agree. Is it continuously going to be like this, or do I need to give up on this critical juncture?
So I don't think it's a critical juncture. I think going forward, decisions we make, we're stuck with. I mean, I think you've been right all these 15 years. And it's a decision that's hard to undo. From the early days of the internet, we're left with some really dumb design decisions because it seemed like a good idea at the time and it didn't matter. I mean, Y2K was enormous. It's a tiny one and very hard to change. So I think these decisions are affecting. Sometimes you get turnover, right? Cell phone technology, we've seen some turnover in some ways and not in others. I do think we have a strong lock-in because of the way IPv6, we were trying to get this out for what, a decade and a half, and unable to because of decisions made in the past. So I think you're right, not that this is the moment, but this is the current state of technological innovation, is that decisions made at the time are very hard to undo. So I would just revise and not use the word juncture, and I think you're safe. I saw a hand back there next.
You mentioned voting in passing in a few of your examples. In Ontario, we have internet voting in some municipalities.
That's bad. Don't do that.
The current government's platform is an investigation of online voting. Can you unpack the security and privacy issues of internet-based voting for us?
So in a word, yikes. I can't build a... So voting has a sort of fundamental issue that makes it harder than anything else, and that's the anonymity requirement. I can do online banking because if something goes wrong, I can unroll the transaction to some degree. I know what happened. But as long as you need a secret ballot, there's this line where I can't do forensics the other way on, right? And that's requirement of the anonymity. So I can't build a system that can't be hacked for internet voting. I just don't know how to do it. And that's bad. A, because someone could hack the vote and not tell you, or B, someone could not hack the vote and tell you they did. Both of which are problematic. So I do worry a lot about internet voting and electronic voting because there's too much potential for election fraud. Not voter fraud, that doesn't happen, but election fraud in many countries. And that cannot be done securely. I think that's very dangerous. It's unfortunate because on the surface it seems like, why should this be so much harder? I can move millions of dollars on the internet. Why can't I vote? And it's that anonymity requirement. That's what makes it hard. If you're willing to vote without anonymity, which it happens in some jurisdictions in Switzerland, and in the United States, voting by fax by overseas military isn't that anonymous. You fax your ballot and someone looks at it. Right? If you're willing to give up anonymity, we can do it just fine. But lots of good reasons why you don't do that in general. So a hand over there first. It was you.
Oh, okay.
No, it's person behind you.
Oh.
Have you given up your question?
Yeah.
Okay, then it is you.
You sure? I was going to ask about innovation. So, I mean, all the bad things, I get it. But one of the challenges being regulatory in nature is how do you not stop something good? So, wondering if you can speak to where you've seen that work well.
Well, so, I mean, lots of examples. I mean, on the extreme, you might have the FDA, the regulating pharmaceuticals in the United States. There's an enormous amount of money, time, and expense that a drug company has to go through before they can sell a pharmaceutical to, like, normal consumers. Right? So there's a way it works, but we slow it down. Something in the middle might be automobiles. Something at the other end is going to be software. Right? So we're going to be somewhere in the middle there. I don't know what. Right? There will be regulations. There won't be regulations of code. There'll be regulations of process and engineers. Because we don't know how to examine code and say this code is secure, but we can make statements about processes. And that's pretty much true in all engineering disciplines, right? This building was built by someone who is a professional engineer, and that meant a set of certifications. Just anybody can't build a building. At least in the United States, they can't. You guys probably have something similar, I hope. Right? Okay, good. Because otherwise, we should go outside. All right, so there's lots of mechanisms to go from the far end, which will be pharmaceuticals, to the freewheeling world of software. Right? It's gonna be somewhere in the middle because these worlds are colliding. Because pharmaceuticals will be administered through a device on your arm with software controlling dosage. Right? That's already a thing. And those things are going to become more and more common. So we're going to have to find some place in the middle. Now you.
I'm a first-year law student, so this is all super thrilling. But I've got a question about a specific trade-off that kind of alludes to a question that was asked earlier about voting rights. I'm particularly interested in privacy and authentication, where biometrics are concerned. There's competing camps, as I've seen it, that say biometrics is a really good solution to authentication and ensuring that you really are you. There's, of course, huge privacy implications of that as well. And I'm wondering where discussions of tech policy can kind of reconcile the concerns between security there.
So this is an example of where you need policy informed by technology, that you have to do both. Because the devil is in the details. The details matter a lot here. Right? So this iPhone has a biometric authenticator. Apple actually did this right. They do not store my fingerprint in any centralized database. In fact, my fingerprint is not stored anywhere at all. When I put my finger on this reader, there is some one-way function which transforms my fingerprint into some weird set of bits, which are compared with a set of bits that are just on this phone. And compare that with the United States Office of Personnel Management that kept fingerprint files on government employees, which the Chinese government said, hey, that's a good idea, let's get some of that, get ourselves some of that. And now for the rest of their lives, Americans who had their data stolen, which is like a surprising percentage of them, have to worry about this. This actually is that bad, right? I mean, so biometrics have a lot of good authentication properties. They have some bad ones. If you lose your password, right, if the Chinese steal your password, you can get a new one. If the Chinese steal your fingerprints, you can't get new ones. So their failure modes are different and in some ways worse. And there's like a dozen of those gotchas. So good informed policy based on technology can do good with biometrics. They're not going to save the world. They have lots of good uses. And that's going to be true for pretty much every piece of technology you see in this space. And the details matter a lot. Yes?
The tension in your speech between the idea that some kind of central regulator would be a great idea, and the idea that the solution or the kind of shape of the solution is to disconnect systems and to drive more decentralized.
Yeah, I know. I kind of hate that too. You got an answer for me?
Let me see if it turns into an answer for you.
I'm taking notes.
In machinery of government, we go through enthusiasms between centralization and decentralization, and it's always going to solve the problem one way or the other that's caused by either centralization or decentralization. But in fact, the problem is neither. It's usually that there's no coherent metaphor or way of thinking, useful way of thinking or ethic about some important area. So it doesn't matter if you centralize it or you decentralize it, it's not going to generate a useful result. But the part of your speech that I found really insightful was you're asking for some kind of ethic around or metaphor or approach that then it doesn't matter.
In cybersecurity, we actually call them norms. That's the word we use, and so I like that.
Yes. But even bigger than specific norms, I mean, democracy is like a big ethic, and it's also
a norm. But yeah, I get it. Okay.
Of dealing with the problem of small numbers of people messing with large numbers of people, which is one of the problems that you're raising.
Okay, I like this. Right, and you see that in business too, right? That centralized versus decentralized, that sort of accordion going back and forth. All right, it's worth thinking about. I kind of think. I mean, I'm also worried about bad actors. Right? Centralization means those who choose to not follow the ethic. I mean, let's take like Kazakhstan, So we can probably do well in our countries, but Kazakhstan, Sudan, or all of these kind of failed states or totalitarian states, we need to make sure they can't misuse the technologies. And that's where I think decentralization wins. But I like this notion of norms. And I think you're right. I think we just don't have a coherent norm. This is this idea that we're just building it based on what companies want without any overarching, is this right? Is this good? I mean, do we want Uber to be taxis? What are we doing here? All right, worth thinking about. Thank you. Oh, heaven. Now this side of the room. Please.
Okay, so assuming we can't have a great migration from VHS to DVD for the internet, if we could, what would be the components of your architecture? But assuming we can't, how do you take into account the concerns, for instance, of developing countries that may want to have more restrictive access on a platform, should they have the ability to do so? Because they want to potentially protect cultural issues.
Right.
They want to proliferate components of their heritage, which may be permeated or undermined by what is otherwise a Western governance model, which some would argue is another colonial model being forced down their throat, and it's being governed in essentially the global north. It's being given to the global south as a shopping network to be able to bring in as much development data as possible and allow Facebook, who is now operating in Africa, but operating out of the United States, to be unmanaged in what they're consuming.
Did you watch Facebook in India like a couple weeks ago? That was entertaining.
It's insane. So if we can't have this great migration to a new architecture with appropriate norms established, how do we address those kind of cultural undermining nature of this new?
And this is the powerful getting more powerful. Right? This is the hegemony dictating terms. Now, I think decentralization actually is how we do this, because in a lot of ways, the countries, the local norms need to be able to coalesce somehow. And if the big norm doesn't allow them, they don't. Or take something that's even something that maybe we as a world want to eliminate. Human trafficking, child porn. I mean, a lot of things that can happen on these platforms that we want to make go away. Now, how do we do that? We might have broad worldwide support. So, I mean, I don't have an answer here. But and I think that's also feeding into this notion of catastrophic risks. That all of these things used to be way more localized, and the internet makes them broader in ways that can be very damaging. So Stephanie next.
Thanks, Stephanie Karen, University of Toronto.
Did you come here for this?
No, I
Good.
didn't.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I'm there when I need to work. Well, first of all, the concept of catastrophic risk, I think, is really interesting in terms of putting the curb on the powerful, because asking the U.S. government to hold the reins on Facebook, and I mean, believe me, civil society's fighting them and I can't, not going to happen as long as they're the multi-billion-dollar.
I'm rooting on Europe here, right?
Yeah,
I really am.
Yeah, no, but the too big to fail argument is a pretty interesting one, because Facebook could crash and burst like a balloon for a number of good reasons. But I raised my hand more for another question. The whole idea of a commission. Were my pal Bob Gelman to be at the RSA conference, and I think the odds of that are pretty slim, but were he there, he would say, well, if the USA had taken the other fork in the road back in the 90s and come up with comprehensive data protection and a commission, a data commissioner, they would at least have a body like 114 other countries.
Right.
Now, that begs my next question. Well, first of all, what are you going to say if somebody comes up in the audience and echoes Bob? And secondly, it gets you to the question of what's the legal frame nowadays? If there's a world-sized monster that we're creating, then there needs to be world-sized governance, and we don't have
a good one, I know.
And the EPS is creating an ethics committee. I think it's time to start looking at ethics in the context of big data, but we don't really have it's not arguably strong enough in the Declaration of Human Rights. We don't have the international law to frame this thing.
And the UN isn't doing very well here.
Exactly.
I mean, they're putting out good stuff, the human rights, but it's still pretty piecemeal.
Well, and the gap between the human rights law and the nitty-gritty, which, as you say, is the devil is in the details, is even wider than the gap between, say, European data protection law. Because, you know, God love them, they've tried. Every time a new technology has come, the Article 29 group has gone after them with an opinion, and so has the International Working Group. But I just wonder, where do you see I realize you're not a legal scholar.
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I mean, I think this is part of the problem of proposing countrywide. I mean, in some ways, the United States is a hegemon here, so a U.S.-only answer will permeate out. But I think you're right. We actually do need international stuff here. And I don't know where it's going to come from. I mean, I really don't.
Well, and I mean, the U.S. and Europe are fighting as hard now, as is witnessed by the Schrems decision, as they were 20 years ago or 30
That's
years
right.
ago even. So
we'll see.
Again, we're going that way instead of this.
Yeah, U.S. is very regulation phobic. I mean, really, I mean, to a natural degree right now. So I don't know. In the back.
Security and other large institutions, in fact, that a lot of the background for bank and the electronic information systems are in the COBOL or another old language like COBOL that you teach you that computer science tool thing?
It's worse than that in many ways, right? It's old languages, it's SCADA systems, old industrial control systems that were never designed to attach to the internet. It's a lot of different, right? This world-sized web is subsuming all of these old systems that were never created with the intention of joining the global internet. Yes, and I think there's an enormous number of emergent properties, emergent vulnerabilities there that we have to watch. Yeah, that's certainly part of the problem. I'm going to write that down. How long do we do this for? Who knows?
10, 15 more minutes.
10, 15 more minutes. Excellent. All right, what was so funny?
All of the OPM. Hilarious. I'm glad they don't have my fingerprint.
They might, you know.
They might. They just never will.
Do they fingerprint Canadians when they come into the U.S.? Or is it?
Sometimes they do, yeah.
I mean, we need sometimes, like on Tuesdays?
Random security.
Depending where you're from, like if you're Quebecois, forget it. We're gonna get you in our database. But in Ontario, you guys are right.
So my question is with regards to encryption, and there's been a lot of bluster coming out of the FBI, the NSA, about backdooring, and Tim Cook basically today said we're not doing it. My question for you is this: where do you see this debate falling? Are backdoors going to be allowed? Are mathematicians finally going to do the math and find some way of ensuring?
No way to do it.
Yeah, so
I mean, fundamentally, I cannot build a backdoor that operates differently depending on the morality of the user. Right? I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. Where this is going to fall, I mean, this is the rhetoric of fear. Right? The FBI did wait for kind of a perfect case for the press. No one will be opposed to getting at, right, the San Bernardino massacre guy, right, terrorism, Islam, all the bad things, getting at his phone. Nobody will object to that. And that's why they picked it. It's an interesting case. So the way to think about this is that older iPhones have a security vulnerability. The data was encrypted, but the code was not. And this vulnerability is a backdoor, right? It exists in old iPhones. And the FBI is saying to Apple, I need help exploiting this backdoor. Write me a hacked operating system that turns off the erase the data after n unsuccessful password attempts, that turns off the delay between trying password attempts, right? Irrelevant to you guys, but really a big deal if you're trying millions. And tries passwords one after the other automatically without having to type them in. Right? Build me that hacked operating system and shove it on that phone. And then let it do its work. This vulnerability in this what happens to be an iPhone 5C does not exist in this iPhone 6. In 2014, Apple changed both their software and their hardware to close that vulnerability. Why? Not because they envisioned the FBI, because China, Russia, everybody. Right? The back door can be exploited by anybody. And they probably weren't thinking about China because, right, this stuff flows downhill. In 2 years, cybercriminals can do this. And we don't want to live in a world where somebody steals your phone, shoves a new OS in it, and gets all your banking passwords. Right? That's why Apple made this fix. The worry here is less the details of the tech. Right? Old tech vulnerable, make the change. New tech not vulnerable, we're great. The worry is the legal precedent. That in the future, Apple will be forced to, not this one, I already have it in my hands, but the next iPhone will have to roll back its security to, lousy levels again, so the FBI can do this in the future. And so this is, how this is going to go out legally, I don't know. And this is one of the weird things about the law, is the law will look at the case, not at the world. And this is really a much bigger issue. But either I can build an iPhone, and by extension a computer, a Fitbit, a car, a medical device, that is secure against all attackers or vulnerable to all attackers. I can't build one that is vulnerable to the FBI but secure from other nation states or cybercriminals. I can't do that. So I think this is a very big deal and potentially very dangerous. And it's being spun badly. When I on the way here, I was looking at a CNN. I walked by at the Boston airport, CNN on television. I didn't hear the sound, but it was some video from San Bernardino, people running around. And the bottom it said, Apple privacy versus national security. That's really bad. It's actually national security versus FBI access. Right? We are all more secure because Apple made this change in 2014. Right? We have more security. Chinese dissidents have more security. Our banking, our personal lives have more security. And I worry about the U.S. government saying to U.S. corporations, you must reduce the security to everybody just in case we want access here. And I purposely didn't put that in my talk because I knew somebody would ask. And on the plane here, I've actually been on the phone all day with reporters about this. And in like the hour between Toronto and here, I wrote an op-ed. It'll be in the Washington Post tomorrow. So hooray. Basically, there are more good things in the world than bad things. We can decide we are going to live in a totalitarian state. Everybody will be under constant surveillance. Right? Always keep your hands where you can see them. Police have all sorts of powers because bad things happen. But we recognize that the price of freedom is the possibility of crime. So the analogy I'll use, it's only okay, is a restaurant. So here's my problem. Terrorists eat at restaurants. Right? They get needed sustenance through restaurants. And if we could stop them eating at restaurants, we will be safer. So here's my solution. We will poison the food in restaurants. Right? Right. Stick with me. Terrorists eat the food and they die. What's wrong with my plan? Right? More in our society, our infrastructure can be used by good people and bad people. Right? Bad people eat at restaurants. Bank robbers drive cars and get away. Right? Guns are used in anger. But the reason our society works is there are more good people and more good uses of technology than bad uses. It is really unfair for the FBI to say that we used to have this ability and now we're losing it. You used to have no ability. Right? Conversations would happen, and then they would disappear. Things would be written down, or they would not be written down. And the FBI would break into your house, and you couldn't get the conversations that happened last week. You had no way of getting it. Right? This device gives law enforcement, gave them a very temporary blip in what's available. Things are going back to what's more normal. We have solved crimes in the past. We will solve them in the future. You are right that the fear rhetoric will do enormous damage here. That the rhetoric of bad things, Paris attack, San Bernardino, terrorism, everybody dies, right, will cause governments to do very bad things to our security. I actually think that will happen in the near term. In the long term, we got to get over it, or we're just going to have chaos. And we will do more damage to our society by keeping these devices insecure than by securing them, even though bad things will happen. That's my argument. Yes.
So,
moderator's prerogative.
I love the way you started off very powerfully with that sort of progression from the internet of other people's things to this idea of, or a metaphor of this sort of world-sized robot. And part of what I find so powerful about that is really this lack of understanding of the emergence that can take place as these these layers are built up on these technologies. So I wanted to take that starting point of yours and apply it to something else that you said sort of right towards the end of the talk. If I got it down right, I was quite surprised, so I wrote it down. You said something like, either we secure these, I was happy though, either we secure these systems or we disconnect them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting to think about whether and to what extent we can actually do that. So will we disconnect Facebook if it's radically insecure and privacy invasive and the rest? But what I'm more interested actually is how you would take, you know, that dictum that you stated and apply it forward. So instead of talking about disconnecting things, talking about the policy question about when we decide whether we'll connect things. So the driverless car, for example. To me, one might say, well, I'm interested in how you would respond to somebody who would say that where we are with this number of deaths, the statistics that are always trotted out in favor of why we're going to get driverless vehicles, that might be like your 10 criminals in Ottawa as a tolerable level compared to the potential emergence of characteristics of that network that you yourself cited in terms of the potential
That's
risks.
right. And we might do something like, say, cars will only do nearby communications, that we're going to forego some of these bigger connectivity and just, knowing what cars are doing. The car manufacturers are actually working on this now, that when the car too ahead of you brakes, there's some electronic signal. So it's not just the visual indicator from the light, there's some signal coming back. So you can imagine things like that.
Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to make sure I understood what your point is. So are you then sympathetic to the idea that there might be arguments against either connecting or
Yes.
if you would just describe fully connecting?
I think there will be arguments, and I think we're going to have to make the trade-offs. And I think this to me is the fundamental issue of the information age, right? Our data individually versus our data collectively. I talked about Waze, really powerfully useful system based on surveillance. I actually think if we took all of our medical data and put it in one big database and let researchers add it, there would be enormous benefits to our species, such that you can argue it is a public health risk for you to decide not to put your data in it. How do we balance that? We got a lot of these, and I think we're going to be arguing these for this entire century. This idea of how much we connect, in what way, for what purpose. And the answers are going to be very specific. They're not going to be general. Cars will be one thing, and in 20 years, cars will be a different thing, and medical data will be one thing. Some stuff you can do with sampling, some stuff you can do with anonymity. I don't want to do medical data with anonymity because if you have the plague, I kind of want to know who you are and where you live, right? But some of the stuff, maybe you need the data. The ways, the data is valuable for the 5 minutes. Then it's useless. So you throw it away. There's going to be a whole bunch of different things. But I think this is the issue. I mean, this is it. I mean, this is what we will be judged on by our grandchildren. When you leave, does that mean we're done?
No, that means that I have to go to another, but I want to thank you.
Well, thank you.
It's a good time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'm hiding things.
He's hiding things.
So on behalf of all of our institutional partners
Hey,
and
thank
the
you.
University of Ottawa, I want to thank you very much for your very timely...
Is this something that if I bring on an airplane, they will stop me?
No,
Not sharp, not pointy.
I dare not.
Not
buy,
liquid.
I dare not buy technology or technology-related books for technology gurus. They may want to search it.
All right. Thank you.
But
So I'll get a bottle of wine. It's like, what are you doing to me? It's like it's the gift of checking your luggage. Thank you.
But thank you so very much, and to everybody, please join us for the reception.
Thank you.